from what I can see, this car is very, very quick. It's not the fastest on pace. I still think the McLaren's the king of one lap speed, but this car really isn't that far behind. Hi guys, Peter Berryman here with Apex Racing Team. So new updates just come out with iRacing, a few new cars to look at, one of which is the Mercedes-AMG GT4, which luckily I'll be coaching. So join me as we take a look at how the car drives and how it stacks up against the rest of the field. In terms of general settings compared to the Cayman, which is sort of all my experience in this car, very, very similar stuff. The only difference, I guess, with the Mercedes compared to that is that our spring rate is at the front axle compared to the rear axle on the Cayman. And we've also got this diff clutches setting. So the diff clutch plates definitely help with just increasing whether you wanted to turn a bit more on entry, which will be a little bit less on exit, and vice versa. So I do feel like the Mercedes has a little bit more fine-tuning that you can do with the setup to help it compared to the Cayman. And the other big thing then, if for you guys that maybe haven't seen Kev's video in the GT3, it's pretty much the same stuff in terms of the ABS settings. Most cars, 11 would be the maximum, which is the opposite in the Mercedes. So we've got 1 to 11, 1 being the highest strength of ABS and traction control, 11 being the weakest, and 12 being off. So that might catch a few guys out. So as you can see in the in-car adjustments page, we're able to change our display dash. So we've got two options. Number one being my preferred as we get the lap time. Of course, you can see we've got a few temps there, oil and battery, water, things like that, whatever it may be. Not really relevant. It's really of no use, but it's more just for the lap time at the bottom. I find this much more useful than page 2. And as you can see then, page 2 obviously showing pressures, which you would think would be more relevant, but as most of you guys know, almost every car in iRacing's minimum tire pressures anyway, so it's not really that much useful. So one other interesting thing about the Mercedes then, if you look at the pedal inputs, we have a clutch, obviously rolling starts for all of these series, so it doesn't really change anything, but if it ever goes to standing start, I think Mercedes is definitely one of the cars you want to use, and the Cayman doesn't have a clutch, so I think this thing would absolutely drop it off the line. So a front engine car then, almost all the cars I drive or have driven have been mid-engine or rear engine cars, so this was definitely a bit of a change to experience a car like this. So going into it, I expected that it was going to be extremely understeery. I was quite pleasantly surprised actually. Definitely a little bit harder than the Cayman to get into the corners, as you would expect. It just takes a little bit longer for the weight to shift, but once you get it into the corner, because there's not much weight on the rear wheels, I do feel like you've got a lot more room to move the car with the pedals. It's a little bit lighter on the rears compared to the Cayman, which feels a bit sort of stuck in the mud, so it's a bit nicer that way. But at the same time, that's one of the things that makes this car difficult to drive, or at least more difficult than the Cayman, I would say, is that once you get it into the corner, it is a bit lively at the rear. In terms of how this car stacks up then, and my limited experience, obviously Montreal being week 1 is the only real place to test it so far, but from what I can see, this car is very, very quick. It's not the fastest on pace. I still think the McLaren's the king of one lap speed, but this car really isn't that far behind. A couple other areas that I haven't really looked too much into, straight line speed and how it stacks up at a track like Monza, and maybe tire deg over a very long run. Definitely I would recommend this car, compared to most of the GT4s, definitely over the Cayman. I think this is much nicer. The biggest gain in performance, I would say, from the Mercedes is definitely its curb handling. So the Cayman, I almost treat the Cayman a bit like a single-seater, that you can't really attack the curbs, or at least when you're attacking them, you have to be very, very careful with how you do attack them or how much you take. And the Mercedes, it's almost a complete flip. It's, you're sort of looking at a curb and wondering how much you can take before you get shouted at by the sim for an off track or, you know, a slowdown. So this, you know, this car munches the curbs, and that's really where it gains all the performance through the corners compared to the Cayman. In comparison, it really wasn't much apart from these cars until we get to the last chicane at this track, and I think off the top of my head, the Mercedes was, you know, 2.5, 3 tenths quicker through the chicane, and it was just because we were able to not only hit the curbs, but the car settles so quickly after hitting the curbs that we're able to carry so much speed whilst taking them. So, in terms of setting up the car then, with the Cayman, you know, the Cayman's always understeer for me with the most recent update, so the Cayman is all about trying to make it turn as much as possible, trying to get it through the corners as fast as possible. So we would do things like stiffening the rear just to try and get the car to rotate entry and exit. With the Mercedes, it's a little bit more of a flip. Obviously, like I've mentioned before, with the car being a bit lighter on exits, that's not so much an issue. So it's more just trying to get the car to rotate on entry. Couple ways, obviously, to do that. We've got the front spring on the front, obviously, so that can affect things quite a bit. And I'm finding the brake bias and the ABS settings then have a huge, you know, change on how the car reacts on corner entry then. So another big thing in GT4s then is obviously the gearing. It's not like we can adjust every individual gear or have, you know, much play over that. So the fixed gear settings can have quite a difference in most cars. You know, the Cayman, the first gear is so short, it's essentially unusable. And that can have effects in corners like the hairpin here at Montreal, compared to the Mercedes, where I feel like the gearing is a bit more natural, a bit more even, a bit better personally. Of course, this is just Montreal, and you know, it's tracks like Monza, you know, your Daytona, things like that, where we'll maybe see the bigger differences. But as you can see in the hairpin there, first gear is definitely usable compared to the Cayman, which, you know, almost felt we were stuck in second gear, just waiting and waiting and waiting because first gear was really of no use. I think I'd really recommend this car. I think this is probably one of my favorite GT4s that I've driven so far in terms of how it stacks up. I think this is very, very competitive. This is a really good direction that GT4s are starting to go, and just the cars in general on iRacing. It's a nice change being able to, you know, take curbs like you would imagine a race car should take them with big suspensions. So if you guys are tempted to get stuck into the GT4s a bit more, sign up to Apex Racing Academy. Of course, we supply setups, replays, track guides for all the other GT4s. We also supply weekly group coaching sessions. We've got a nice little community going over there. So like I say, I think this series is one of the best on the sim at the minute in terms of the, you know, cars and the tires, and obviously a big thing in iRacing. So yeah, it'd be cool to get you guys stuck in. Thanks for watching.